Alrighty, boys and girls, welcome back. If you missed the last video talking about communism and how it doesn't mean what everybody thinks it means, and vice versa at the same time, I was a little bit of a hiatus. Work got really crazy. I was traveling, didn't work out. I missed you last week with the video, so sorry about that. Gonna try to keep it pretty regular here. I am really trying to build this channel. I would really like it if this could be my full-time gig. However, I know we're not all actually YouTube stars, but I'm gonna try nonetheless. Other than that, I don't think I have anything for you. Let's get after it. We're gonna talk about World War One today. Um, like everything so far, this is going to be topical. We're going to go back and talk about significant things within this larger umbrella, but we're going to do it later. I want to talk about big picture stuff first. So that said, we're not going to talk about individual battles, with one exception. We're not going to get into the nitty gritty yet. Like I said, this initial series is going to be very broad, and then we'll go back in and we'll tackle smaller, more significant parts of each section here. Like I've said before, I used to use these slides when I was teaching. Some of them have been modified, some of them haven't. So you'll see like numbers up in the corner. There's an 11 there. It doesn't really mean anything. U.S. History 1 and 2 hybrid doesn't mean anything. To you guys, it's just a leftover slide from before, and I was too lazy to change it. So I'm sorry, and we're going to have to deal with it together. I think we'll get through it. All right, let's get after it. So how did it start? We're gonna give this a very high school education beginning. If you remember anything about World War One in high school, you are gonna remember Mania. It is a fantastic acronym. Stands for all the things you see here. This is how you get like an A or a 5 on the AP test. Remember Mania. Also, I'm looking at this picture here of what is supposed to be uh, British troops in World War One. However, if you look at the trench on the right, the second guy in, he's holding a handgun. That's clearly a Browning high power, which didn't come out until 1935. This picture has to be from World War Two, or possibly later, I suppose. So I'm already wrong. I apologize. Not off to a great start. All right, moving on. Militarism. There is your like textbook definition on top. I'm not going to really read it out to you. It's the aggress. It's just a buildup of forces. It's the same thing that happened between the U.S. and the USSR during the Cold War, with nukes. That could also be described as militarism. It's just the buildup of armed forces. That's all. Um, and also remember, Germany wasn't always Germany. It was Prussia and a bunch of other like nation states. But as of 1871, they do all come together as a nation called Germany. That's what we know it as today. But that conflict, the like the kind of upheavals that led to the Germanic states coming together. If you remember back a couple of episodes ago, there were a bunch of German immigrants to the U.S. Because there was a bunch of fighting in Europe. Part of that was from this. um, and part of this fighting, the states attacked and defeated France. Makes France very angry. France is going to be really mad at Germany for a really long time to come. And it starts here, back in the 1870s. Um, and part of that defeat, Germany forces France to give up some of their territory along the border that they share with now Germany. Again, not thrilled about it. Britain's policy at this time is one of like the older brother in Western Europe. Um, remember, like they're a pretty solid empire. They have kind of done all the things that they want to do by now. Um, and they what they don't want is somebody else getting strong enough to rival them. Um, if you remember our talk about the Spanish-American War, the Spanish Empire is kind of falling apart. France just lost a bunch of border space. The Dutch were never really a military threat to the English. What they don't want is a nation becoming very strong. So what they're doing is helping some of the smaller countries, so that the bigger ones like don't bully them and get too big. By the 1890s, Germany has become the strongest nation in Europe, and it's really not a question anymore. They very quickly elapse um, Britain in that fashion, and Britain is also not thrilled, and they enter their kind of own arms race with Britain, mostly in terms of the Navy. For the last, oh, I don't know, 300 years, arguably more, uh, Britain has decimated the world on the oceans. No questions asked. And this is the first time, arguably maybe since the American Civil War, um, with combined American and French navies. But there's certainly been no single nation that has been able to rival Britain, until Germany in the 1890s. And Britain being an island nation and a worldwide colonial empire, they rely very, very, very heavily on their navy to defend their home island and also all of their prospects around the globe. So they're feeling very, very threatened in the 1890s, early 1900s. Things are tense. There's also a bunch of alliances, and this right here is why it becomes a world war and not just like a Serbian uh, civil war. It's all of these alliances, and this is also why we have to go so far back, because so many countries get dragged in. It's not as simple as, well, Gavrilo Princip shot that guy, so they're going to go to war. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So Germany, new most powerful nation in Europe, they sign alliances with Italy and Austria-Hungary. Those three countries together become known as the Triple Alliance. And Russia, sitting on the other side of Europe, is like, ooh, not thrilled about that. Not thrilled about all of Germany's power, and now they're going to align with Austria-Hungary, who is also a non-trivial naval power, and Italy, who is a very tactile infantry-based nation. They have some naval stuff, but it's mostly in the Mediterranean. But their infantry is very good. And Russia's not thrilled about this alliance, and they think that Germany is going to move eastward towards Russia. Spoiler alert. Um, and at the same time, Russia is also competing with Austria-Hungary for a bunch of influence in space and uh, natural resources, a whole pile of stuff, in the Balkans. And many of the countries that in the Balkans at this time, especially, share the same ethnic background as the Russians, for the most part. And because of this, Serbia, when Serbia gains their independence, Russia supports them because Russia sees them as like the little brother. They have the same ethnic background, they have kind of the same culture. They want to help prop Serbia up when it gets its independence. Now, Russia, because it's afraid of Germany and doesn't want them influencing the Balkans, now they have a common interest with France to oppose Germany and Austria-Hungary. This initial just French and Russian alliance is easily, very conveniently named the Franco-Russian alliance. And quickly after that, despite Britain and France hating each other forever, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So the British join the Franco-Russian alliance, and they become known as the Triple Entente. So we have the Triple Alliance, which is Germany, Italy, Austria, Hungary, and the Triple Entente, which is Britain, France, Russia. And that's kind of where we stand in terms of uh, larger country alliances. There's a whole pile more. But again, keeping it large overview, this is where we're starting for now. Nationalism. I talked a lot about nationalism when we talked about in my last video about communism meaning whatever the user wants it to mean. Um, Complicated. Today's connotation is not the same as it always was. Nationalism in and of itself is not a bad thing. However, you'll get called all kinds of terrible things if you say yourself you are a nationalist. What it means, its textbook definition, go Google it right now, is intense pride in one's homeland. And we are seeing this across the globe. A lot of countries, like we just said about Germany, are reaching heights on their own that they have never seen before. The U.S. is certainly one of them. Germany, like we said, is one of them. But Japan is one of them. There's a whole bunch. Poland, which is ironically doing very well before the First World War starts. Um, there's a lot of countries who think they're the best, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. However, um, when combined with all this other stuff, it does add add uh, add fuel to the fire. This other thing that's happening right now that kind of latches on to what we just talked about with Serbia and Russia is this idea of self-determination. The idea that people who share a national identity should have their own country. This is not going to go well with global empires. The idea of self-determination. Keep this in mind because we are going to talk about it after World War I a little bit, but especially after World War II. The decolonization of Africa, but also like the rest of the world. Self-determination comes up again and again and again because these people have been ruled by people who do not share a national identity with them for so long. Initially, it's a problem in the Balkans. Um, really because much of the Balkans were ruled by either the Austro-Hungarians or the Ottoman empires, but the people who were being ruled didn't really share an ethnic background with them or a national identity or a culture. They were not meshing well. And in theory, common sense says, look, there's a bunch of us like minded, like cultured people over here. We'd like to kind of be our own thing. Can we do that? And then somebody across the world says, no, you can't do that because I say so. It's going to make some people mad. It's going to make so many people so mad the Balkans actually get nicknamed the Balkan Powder Keg because everybody knew this place was going to blow up. It was just a matter of time. Imperialism. Kind of the thing that I have been talking about this whole time. All of these other things attached to and have to do with imperialism. The greatest, obviously, example is the UK. The graphic here is just some of the places that England had their hands in, no pun intended. But so as areas like the Balkans are pushing for more independence, it gets more and more of a hot button topic. And remember, Serbia is backed by Russia because they have the same ethnic background. They become independent, and Serbia, wants to annex Bosnia because Bosnia also has the same ethnic background as Serbia. They have Slavic backgrounds. Except instead of being annexed by Serbia, Austria-Hungary Bosnia gets annexed by Austria-Hungary, and this makes the Serbs furious. The Bosnians, as you can imagine, weren't thrilled about it either. The message that this sends to the world and really the Balkans, basically, the Slavs will never be able to become independent. They will never be able to unify their culture and become their own sovereign nation. which is kind of what Germany just did. So they're feeling like, well, if they got to do it, why can't we? Um, Everybody's really mad, not happy about what's going on. And like I said, the rest of the world can see this. They can feel this coming. They don't know what's going to happen, but there's so much tension here that it can't be ignored. So everybody's eyes are kind of on this area of the world. And what really kicks it off is the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. So it's June 1914. He is the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary. He is in Bosnia, which is where they just annexed, and the Serbians are mad about them annexing. They are driving through town in an open car, JFK style. And there is a terrorist group called the Black Hand, and they are going to assassinate Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And it actually goes hilariously wrong so many times. And it's not hilarious because people did die, but it seems like if it's like a cartoon sketch. It's really rough. So like the first guy, he sees them, throws a grenade, chink, boom, bounces off Ferdinand's car, rolls under the car behind him, blows that car up, kills those people, kills a bunch of people on the sidewalk. This causes Ferdinand's driver. He speeds, changes, path, direction, all those things. Another Black Hand member finds them and goes to shoot them. His gun jams. Ferdinand's driver gets away again and takes a wrong turn. He has to turn around. Turning around in an automobile in 1914 is not a quick process. It's not just pop it in reverse and look over your shoulder. So the driver is taking his time trying to get this vehicle the way it needs to face. And all of that is happening outside of a cafe where Gavril Princip happens to be sitting. He sees that it's Franz Ferdinand. He walks outside, shoots him and his wife. Also, like, the escape of all of the Black Hand people is similarly ridiculous. One guy like tries to jump off a bridge into a river, but the river is wicked shallow, so he breaks both of his legs. One guy tries to take cyanide capsule, but it's like old or expired or something, so it doesn't work. He just gets wicked sick, and they get caught. Like I said, it's ridiculous. What makes everybody so mad is less so the assassination, but more so the assassination happened with the knowledge of the Serbian officials. Remember, the Serbs are mad at Austria-Hungary for annexing Bosnia. Serbia knew that it was going to happen, and they were hoping it would start a war to bring down the Austro-Hungarian Austro-Hungarian Empire. There we go. Got it. They're hoping it's going to start a war because they want the Austro-Hungarians to fall. What they don't realize is that it's going to start a world war. So, as this happens, all of the alliances we just talked about are triggered. So, because Austria-Hungary is mad at Serbia because they knew that the Black Hand was going to shoot Franz Ferdinand, they declare war on Serbia. And what this does is bring Austria-Hungary and their alliances into the war. So that is the Triple Alliance: Germany and Italy and Austria-Hungary. As such, it brings Serbia's alliances into the war, which at this time is just Russia. So now Russia gets dragged into the war, and that means Russia's alliances also get dragged into the war, which are France and Britain. Now, Italy, starting a world war trend here, is going to change sides after the Triple Entente promises to cede a bunch of Austro-Hungarian territory to them after the war. So Italy very quickly swaps sides, just like, spoiler alert, they're going to do in World War II also. But we'll talk about that more in a second here. But this is what we're looking at. And this is a map of all of our allies. The tan ones at this time are nothing. The Triple Alliance is red, and the Triple Entente and also the Russia's allies are, so they're blue and green. Um, and you can look at me and say, "Whoa, why North Africa's here?" That's, well, a bunch of French colonies are in North Africa. So just like in World War II, all of those colonial troops are going to get dragged into it as well. That's why it's a world war. All right. Just some I don't know. It's not, less of a graphic. Just to clear some things up here. Here's what's going on. The Allies, um, which is confusing for some people because this term gets used in both World War One and World War Two. The Allies in World War One consist of the Triple Entente, which is France, Russia, Britain, and then also Serbia, like we said, Italy for a minute, and then the U.S. for a little bit at the end. The Central Powers consist of the original Triple Alliance, plus eventually the Ottoman Empire, Bulgaria, Bosnia, which is really weird because Bosnia wants to be with Serbia, but they got annexed by the Austro-Hungarians. It's very complicated. It's very annoying. But this is where we're sitting right now, and there's a whole, again, it's a world war. There's a pile more. These are just like the main belligerents. Germany and their U-boats. So they're going to be a non-trivial problem for the Allies, actually, in both world wars. But remember, Britain is an island nation, and they're spread out all over the globe for their colonial powers. So they're very much dependent on merchant ships from other, sometimes independent, sometimes not countries, um, for food and supplies and everything for living. Germany knows this. They start targeting those ships. They want to starve the British out. The problem is a lot of these merchant ships, especially the ones coming from the U.S., are civilian ships, and this pisses a lot of people off. There are two very famous sinkings, the Lusitania and the Sussex, in 1915 and 16, respectively. They are both passenger ships. They might as well be friggin' cruise ships. They happen to also have um, British supplies on them. If they're going to Britain anyways, might as well toss them on there. The validity of, were they really just passenger ships? Was it a ruse? Did they put civilians on there to try to ward off the Germans from sinking them? All to be debated at a separate time. Honestly, all of those different things are valid at the same time. What I do want to point out is a common misconception that the sinking of the Lusitania is what pushes the United States to enter World War One. That is not true. As you can see, it happens almost a year before the U.S. enters the war. So deciding, or one of the straws on the camel's back, however, not the one that broke it. Between February 3rd and March 21st of just 1917, Germany sinks 6 American ships. This obviously pisses a lot of people off. Before this, honestly, there was a non-trivial amount of American citizens who thought we should enter the war on the side of the Central Powers. And it's this stuff here that changed a lot of people's minds. The Zimmerman telegram. Big deal. So, a German official, guy by the name of Arthur Zimmerman, he sends a telegram to Mexico, and he says, "Listen, why don't you invade the U.S. and at the same time we will invade the U.S. and when we conquer them, we'll give you back all the stuff they stole in the Mexican-American War." And I'm realizing I misspelled and. Jesus. Can't believe I was a teacher. Anyways, unfortunately for both Mexico and Germany, the Brits intercept this telegram and they don't just give it to the U.S. government. That would be far too easy. And they thought the U.S. government was sweeping under the rug because, I mean, we wiped the floor with Mexico once. We'll do it again. It's not like the U.S. government was worried about a war with Mexico, and that's why the British knew that, and that's why they thought they would cover it up. So instead of bringing it to the U.S. government, they leak it to the American press, and the press prints this everywhere. And if the sinking of U.S. merchant ships didn't push a lot of people to the point that it was time for war, it's this. It's the Zimmerman telegram that pushes maybe not the American government, but certainly the American people to say that this is time. We need to get involved. This is they're targeting us now. Before this, it was a European war. Like this is their problem. Sure, we'll sell guns to both sides, but hey, we're businessmen. We're doing business. But now it's personal for a lot of Americans. They're coming after us on our home soil. So this is what pushes a lot of Americans over. So we declare war. Um, because of this, or because of the declaration of war on Germany, that means we also declare war on the Central Powers. We officially enter World War One. The war effort at home. So this is the first time that there is a draft. 2.8 million American men are drafted for the war, and a little bit over 2 million American men volunteered. That's almost 5 million Americans going to war in Europe. Taxes increase. That happens with every war ever. However, I want to throw it out there that income tax was created because of World War One. It was supposed to be a temporary tax to offset the cost of sending all of the supplies to Britain and then to offset the cost of actually being in the war. It was supposed to end after World War One. Anyways, there were these things called victory gardens. Um, Basically, a bunch of propaganda. Not that it didn't help. There's positive propaganda. But what this did, it pushed a bunch of people to grow their own food, to start their own gardens, that kind of thing. Basically, just to become a little bit more self-sustaining, grow your own food so that we can save so we can save food to send to the troops overseas. Women step up big time. We're going to see this again in World War II, and they definitely get more recognition for it in World War II. However, it absolutely happens in World War One. Honestly, it happens in every war ever. It happened in the Civil War. It happened in the American Revolution. Um, anyways, um, the women step up to do a bunch of the jobs that there's no men to do because they're all in Europe fighting. So there's female police officers, factory workers, railroad workers, mail carriers, engineers, train conductors, everything you can imagine. Women are going ahead and doing it, and they're keeping the country alive while all the men are overseas fighting. While all of that is happening, paranoia is huge at this time because not all propaganda is good. Most propaganda is bad. There was a lot of attacks on American-born and first generation German immigrants in the U.S. Americans were urged by the government to monitor their fellow citizens, like that terrible like 1984 or what was that other book about those kids? Roald Dahl wrote it about the kids with like powers. I don't know. The see something, say something. Um, this is where that comes from. This is the first time that American citizens are made to be and promoted to be paranoid of their fellow citizens, to monitor your fellow citizen. It is patriotic of you to tell on your neighbors if you think they're doing something weird. And just to show that even more private organizations are formed to spy on neighbors and coworkers. Um, Neighborhood Watch gets its start here because of a German paranoia in World War One. Schenck v. the U.S. This is a court case that comes about in 1919. It is a massive blow to American First Amendment rights. So this guy, Charles Schenck, he writes a bunch of letters to people who got drafted, and he tells them that the draft is wrong, and you should write protest letters. He says you shouldn't go. It's not your problem. They can't force you to go and fight and die, and that's what he does. That's all he does. He writes these letters, and he gets arrested for writing these letters, and he goes to court, and he appeals this case all the way up to the Supreme Court, where our U.S. government, despite our very clear First Amendment rights, rules that the U.S. government can limit free speech in times of war. 1,000 convictions were made just during World War I that used this case as precedent. What this means is, I try to keep things fairly unbiased on this channel, but at the same time, we're talking about history. It's very hard to do that, to talk about politics and not have a sway one way or the other. Where I very personally draw a line is the violation of the U.S. Constitution, and this is absolutely that. What this means is that essentially the government can take away your civil rights at any time for any reason. They're just going to make up a reason to take them away because this guy was not even stopping, urging people to write protest letters. That's it. But they said that he can't do that. He doesn't have that right. Your freedom of speech doesn't extend into wartime. It's been seen before. Lincoln did it during the Civil War. We talked about that. It's not the first time. It's not the last time. Just important to know. This was a big deal at the time. It's a big deal to talk about when we teach World War I. And also it makes me angry, so I'm going to talk about it. People should know about it. Minorities during the war effort. So African Americans, 400,000 African Americans served during the war, and 42,000 of them have combat roles. Now, at this time, combat units were still racially segregated and basically always had white commanding officers. And it's going to stay that way basically through World War II. The military will not become racially desegregated until 47 or 48. I forget. Somebody let me know in the comments. I forget. It's 47 or 48. However, it's a lot of the effort of African Americans during World War I that proves that they are capable of all the things that a white soldier is during World War II, and that all of those guys, they go on to do a bunch of very incredible things. Actually, the Fat Electrician has a couple of videos on like the Tuskegee Airmen and stuff like that. And then after it won't be, like I said, until after World War II it becomes desegregated. But the push for that starts here. Women, we talked a little bit about already. But going a little bit deeper, World War I is the first war in which women officially served. So previously, like I said, women have been helping in every American war and wars before that, forever. Most of the time, it was as nurses, surgeons, things like that. However, like I said, women for World War I are officially in the military. In the Navy, they served as clerks, pharmacists, chemists, radio operators, electricians, photographers, typists, all kinds of stuff like that. Stuff that not non-combat roles, basically, drivers, stuff like that. The Army, not as progressive, only hired women as nurses. However, they would hire over 20,000 of them. And we'll see in World War II, kind of the same thing, but their roles are definitely expanded. They'll have combat adjacent roles in World War II. We'll talk about that when we get there. World War One combat. We're going to talk about trench warfare. This picture's gross. Sorry, that's what trench foot looks like. So, the single weapon that killed more soldiers in World War One than anything aside from disease is artillery. A lot of people think it's machine guns. Machine guns did play a huge role. We're going to talk about it. But artillery was the number one killer, basically in almost every conflict. Um, but to escape and protect from artillery, both sides begin digging trenches. A lot of the trenches were very elaborate. This is where soldiers spent most of their time. They were like zigzagging in like S shapes, so that if a grenade got thrown into one side, it wouldn't blow up the guys on the other. There were tunnels, the sapper tunnels, and there were, there were aid stations, and there were cafeterias. It was everything. Especially the German ones. The German trenches were like extremely impressive. They were so well done. They were so extensive and like elaborate and fancy. Look up some pictures. Honestly, it's thoroughly impressive. Anyways, the trenches, despite the Germans' fanciness, it sucked. Uh, if you don't know much about where the fighting was happening in Europe, it rained a lot. That means, they didn't have proper drainage. There was always standing water. Standing water means mosquitoes and rats and trench foot. And trench foot is basically it's an infection that happens when your feet are wet for a long time, and it looks gross and makes your toes fall off and gross. A lot of feet have to be amputated because of trench foot. Um, but yeah, the life in the trenches was terrible. They would use dead bodies as like sandbags or barricades in some extensive situations, and the rats would feed on the bodies. And then people had no food, so some of them were eating rats, especially in the Russian front. Oh, it was awful. Combat in the trenches was arguably even worse. It was incredibly in your face and brutal. Trench raids were terrible. So you got to remember at this time the main service rifle of every main belligerent is a bolt action rifle. Submachine guns don't exist yet. Assault rifles don't exist yet. So when you're hopping into a trench, the best thing you have is maybe a handgun. So, a Luger, a Ruby, a 1911, some grenades. But I mean, it came down to axes and knives and knuckle dusters and clubs and the butt of a rifle. It was incredibly up close and brutal. Um, yeah, it was awful. Um, Americans would bring shotguns into the trenches, which were effective so long as you could keep your paper cartridges dry. The Germans would have a bit of a problem with that. Maybe we might do a vignette on the German complaint about American shotguns. Um, but it wouldn't be until the very end of the war that the concept of the submachine gun gets invented, and those get dropped in the trenches. Maybe the last 6 weeks or so of the war, maybe a little bit more. But yeah, it's mostly hand-to-hand combat, and it's terrible and awful, and I wouldn't want to have to do it. No Man's Land. So No Man's Land is just the area between two sets of trenches. There is nothing there except mines, mines and barbed wire. So that when you go up over the top and you charge the next one, it takes out as many guys as they can, while the machine guns spray the rest down. Honestly, World War One combat was terrible. Um, yeah, that's it. There's not much to say about it. It was it was terrible. There's no other way to say it. New technology that was used in World War One. I alluded to machine guns a bit before. This is the first time, well, not the first time, but the first major combat usage of machine guns is in World War One. They were invented, you know, mm, uh, right after the concept of smokeless powder was invented. Hiram Maxim did have a concept for a machine gun that ran on black powder. However, he couldn't really get it to run right because of black powder has so much fouling. With the invention of smokeless powder, he gets that to run. The Maxim machine gun is huge. The Colt Potato Digger, um, the Colt BAR, the Browning BAR, um, the Shosha, the French Shosha, the Lewis gun, stuff like that. They're going to be huge in World War One. Most of them are used as static emplacements. However, guns like the BAR and the Shosha get used in a concept called walking fire, which is exactly what it sounds like. As you go up and over the top, you shoot as you walk. Actually, U.S. Webgear even had a spot for the butt of the BAR to go into. At waist height, you would fire literally from the hip every time your right foot hit the ground to kind of cover your movement and everybody else's movement as moving up. That's what walking fire was. So if you had a lighter machine gun like that, they weren't called light machine guns at the time, called automatic rifles. That's kind of how it was used. Another big thing, poison gas, invented by the Germans, but does get used on both sides. Um, Another horrible, awful, terrible thing. Dizziness, vomiting, suffocation, blindness if you get stuck in it too long. Hitler actually got hit with mustard gas. Gas mask get invented to combat the poison gas. Um, for everybody, for all frontline troops for the most part, had were issued gas masks. Even horses for cavalry, they had gas masks. They look terrifying. Feel free to look them up. Flamethrowers also invented by the Germans, and they're only used by the Germans in World War One. And this is one thing that's going to be really, really good for clearing trenches when they worked. They didn't always work. It was new technology. They didn't really have the bugs worked out yet. But I threw in here that poison gas was and flamethrowers were invented by the Germans both because they were mad at the U.S. for using shotguns. I just find that ironic. First use of armored tanks. Invented and used by the British first. Really only by the British. The Germans did have some, but they didn't really get deployed. Um, they're unreliable for the most part. They broke down a whole lot, but when they were working, they were really good. Crushed barbed wire. Made crossing no man's land awesome. Um, some like anecdotes of armor in general. The other place armor was used was I forget the word for it, but it's like the little armored, I don't know, shield thingy that snipers would hide behind. There would be a cutout for the rifle, so they could shoot, but they couldn't get counter sniped. The British, the Germans were using those a lot, and the British found out that the tempering on them, yeah, sure, it would stop a regular 303 cartridge. However, you got to remember a lot of the at this time, a lot of British officers spent time in Africa, big game hunting. And they found out that a lot of these big game cartridges would go right through those little hardened sniper shields. And they started using safari rifles to counter snipe German snipers, which I always thought was kind of cool. Planes become a huge deal. This is the first time planes are used in combat. Initially, they're only used for reconnaissance. However, they very quickly get guns mounted on them. Initially, they get mounted on the wing. That is very hard to aim, so then they get mounted either right in front of the cockpit, up front, like in front of the pilot, but not within reach of the pilot, get fired with a solenoid. Um, then the problem there is you are shooting through the propeller. So two things get invented to combat that. There is a synchronizer and an interrupter. And it's a series of gears that get connected from the machine gun to the propeller, or technically vice versa, and tell the machine gun where the propeller is at certain times, but in a mechanical sense. So a synchronizer um, adjusts the rate of fire of the machine gun to only fire when the propeller is not directly in front of it. And an interrupter lets the machine gun fire at its normal rate. However, it stops the machine gun from firing when the propeller is directly in front of the barrel. That makes sense. So the end result is the same. How they go about it is a little bit different. And at the very end here, we have Zeppelins. They're giant blimps that the Germans use for dropping bombs. They get used. They get used a fair amount. However, I think their usage is definitely overstated. But they were there, and it's important to know that. Russia messes everything up. Typical. So March 1917, bunch of riots break out. Why? Russia is not doing well. The Tsarist government under Nicholas II is throwing basically the entirety of their supplies to the Russian troops, which sounds like a good thing, except he's literally starving out his civilians. They are dying. So there's a bunch of riots. This marks the beginning of the Russian Revolution. The people overthrow Tsar Nicholas II, which is a nice way of saying that. They kill his whole family, and they set up a temporary government. Now, after this so that's the Russian Revolution. After this, so convoluted. The Germans have Lenin captured, and they want to destabilize the new temporary Russian government, so they release Lenin into Russia because they know he will go overthrow that government, and he does. So him and his Bolshevik party, they overthrow that temporary government, and then they set up a new communist government in November of 1917. And that is called the October Revolution, which is super confusing. It's called the October Revolution because at this time the Russians used a different calendar than we did. So for us it happened in November. For us it happened in October. For them it happened in November. So now we have a new communist government. The first order of business Lenin does is we're pulling out of World War I. We've got enough stuff to deal with. Our people are starving over here. We got our own shit to deal with. So what this does effectively for everybody else is closes an entire front of the war, and it allows Germany to reallocate those resources to the Western Front, which kind of sucks for everybody else. However, in the peace treaty with Germany, Russia loses a lot of territory, which is like modern day Poland, Finland, Ukraine. Not great, but they're setting up the USSR, which is going to be massive. So Lenin doesn't really care. He's going to take Finland and Ukraine back as part of the USSR, anyways, or at least satellite nations. So, like I said, he doesn't really care. The Battle of Bellewood. This is the one. Oh, I didn't put the picture here. Damn it. Well, anyway, we'll push through it anyways. This is the one battle I did want to talk about. Because it has it's just so cool. I have literally a tattoo of this battle. It sets a precedent for so much American history, U.S. military history. It's a big deal. So right outside of the Marne River in France, there's this wooded area called Bellewood, and it separates this area from Paris, basically. And the only people who are there are a bunch of French forces and a bunch of U.S. Marines. And as part of the spring 1918 offensive, the Germans are moving towards Paris. And the Marines and the French forces want to stop the Germans from getting to Paris. The Marines are part of the American Expeditionary Force. This gets renamed later, but it's their first engagement. And their captain, Lloyd Williams, well, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So the Germans, they attack, and the Marines and the army, or the Marines and the French forces hold off the Germans, and they retreat. And now the French are thinking that the Germans are going to come back, they're going to counterattack, and they don't want to stay in the wood line for it. They want to fall back to Paris and then defend Paris from Paris. They don't want to go outside the limits of Paris. And Marine Captain Lloyd Williams says, "Retreat? Hell, we just got here." So the army and the French retreat to Paris, and the Marines stay in Bellewood. And they single-handedly fight off the Germans. They don gas masks, they fix bayonets, and they fucked those Germans up. It's thoroughly impressive. And, were the Germans beat down? Had they been there for several years? Yes. Were the Marines new and fresh and itching for a fight? Yes, absolutely. Was it fair? No. I don't give a shit. Those baby-faced Marines, those doughboys, they kicked the shit out of the greatest military in Europe. It was impressive, is what I'm getting at. And the Germans started calling them the Marines. Oh, I forget the German word for it, but they started calling them devil dogs. Something Hunded. Let me know in the comments. I forget what it is. But this is where the Marines get their nickname, the Devil Dogs, and they get it because of the way they fought the Germans. And what the legacy of all of this is, it cements the reputation of the U.S. Marines as elite shock troops. The U.S. Marines are shock troops before the invention of the term shock troops, which is another 2 decades away, again, by the Germans. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting a little hyped up. And Bellewood gets renamed. Oh, I'm going to mess this up. Bois de la Brigade de la Marine. I don't know if I said that right. I did my best. It's the Woods of the Marines, the Woods of the Marine Brigade. And it gets renamed that by the French as like a tribute to the Marines that fought there. I thought that was really cool. Like I said, I get really hyped up about this battle. I think it's super cool. That's why I wanted to talk about it. Anyways, how do the Allies win? So, kind of like I just alluded to, the American troops that get there in 1917, remember, they haven't been fighting since 1915. So they're fresh, they have high morale, and their high morale boosts the morale of the other Allied troops. Germany does launch that final offensive. They try to take Paris, but like I said, the Battle of Bellewood, they hold them off. In October of 1918, Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia declare independence. So, like I said, so in the peace treaty with Russia, Poland goes to Germany, but Poland just declared independence. So their parent countries, which are respectively Germany, the Ottoman Empire, and Austria-Hungary, they lose support from those countries, and they're not small countries, especially Poland. So that's a lot of wartime supplies. That's a lot of soldiers. That's a lot of resources now that are not in the bag for the Central Powers. And it's so bad. It's so much of a suck of resources that the Ottomans and Austro-Hungarians surrender because no, they don't have the resources now. Um, Germany holds on for a little bit longer. There's a couple of weird things that happen. A bunch of sailors at Germany's main base, they mutiny, and then other bases hear about that mutiny, and they follow, and they seize power in a bunch of different towns. Um, Germany like turns on itself at the end here because they know that they're losing this war. They lost their largest allies, and the citizens don't want to see more soldiers die. So they mutiny. And there are other things that happen. Like I said, this is a broad overview, but what this does is it pushes the German emperor to step down, and a new government gets created very quickly, and they sign a ceasefire with the Allies. Um, so by late 1918, November, there's there's nobody left to fight. They defeated themselves, kind of. And like I said, it was Russia that really starts it. If Russia hadn't have had their own civil war and then lost Poland, then Germany probably could have stuck out longer. Who knows? But everybody was gone. The Central Powers had kind of fallen away due to lack of resources and funds and soldiers. The Treaty of Versailles, in terms of Germany and the Allies, um, France is very mad, um, and they kind of designed this treaty to punish Germany as much as possible. So they have to admit to the guilt of starting the war, which, if you remember, had literally nothing to do with Germany other than they were in an arms race with the British. It started because Serbian or yeah, Serbian shot at Austro-Hungarian in Bosnia. Germany's got to return all of its captured territory. That's fairly standard. That's not a terrible one. Germany gets divided into two, and then some of its land gets tossed into other countries. Um, we're going to see this is the same thing's going to happen in World War II. Um, it is just odd that the Allies' first instinct is just cut the country in half. Um, Germany is made to be responsible for all wartime losses and forced to pay reparations. In 1918, it was like $33 billion, some insane amount of money, like never to be able to pay back. Insane. This part, number four, was just designed to bankrupt Germany. That's exactly what it was because the French were mad. Germany's military gets limited in size. We're going to see the same thing after World War II. They're not allowed to have an air force at all, and they can't have a military presence west of the Rhine River. Um, Again, we're going to see the same thing after World War II, and we're going to see how like all of this stuff like doesn't get followed by Germany within 7 years. But like I said, all of this together is just designed to make Germany as weak as possible. The Allies are paranoid. They don't. They knew Germany was this up and coming big bad powerful country, and they just didn't want to see that happen again, which is awful ironic. Oh, this map looks terrible blown up. I'm so sorry, but we can still kind of read what's going on here. This is just the map changes that happened. So you can see on the left side, we basically had two empires: the German Empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire, and it gets broken up a whole pile. Um, Yugoslavia, Hungary, Austria, Czechoslovakia, Romania, all that stuff gets is the remnants of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. If you look up at Poland, you can see that some land was ceded or taken from Germany, but mostly from Russia. And you can see that orange splotch in the center of top of Poland there is like the other half of Germany. That's the getting split up into two pieces. The U.S. and the peace treaty. Woodrow Wilson, he went to the conference with what he called his 14 points. It didn't get a lot done. Truthfully, I'm not a huge fan of Woodrow Wilson. He ran his campaign on staying out of World War One, and then as soon as he won, we basically entered right after he took office. Not a huge fan, kind of a liar, cheated on his wife. Anyways, he goes to this conference with his 14 points, and what he wants to do with these 14 points is create a long-lasting peace in Europe. He wants to what he wants is to create the UN before the UN exists. He wants to eliminate causes of war. He wants freedom of trade, freedom of seas, disarmament. He wants to see colonial powers like disbanded. He wants self-determination. Is really what he wants. Um, he wants Europe to be based on he wants European borders to be based on ethnicity and national identity, and culture, things like that, which is what we talked about with the Balkans in the beginning. And then he wants to create this thing he calls the League of Nations. For all intents and purposes, it is an early form of the UN. And the League of Nations does get created, and then Congress votes not to join it. So Woodrow Wilson created it, and then the U.S. doesn't even join, which I always thought was kind of funny. The rest of the world, what's going on? Um, as a result of there was a bunch of peace treaties. I'm not going to go over them all, but 4 total empires are dismantled. The Russian Empire gets dismantled. However, it's going to reform as the USSR, which is kind of its own weird empire. The German Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire are all broken up, as we just kind of talked about, into 14 total countries, which are not all on this map, but they're listed down there if you want to look at all that. I'm not going to list them all. There's a whole pile of them. But that is like the cartographical resolution. And that's kind of where we end. By the time all of this has happened and the peace treaties have been realized, it's 1920, 1922-ish. Next time we'll come back, we'll talk about the interwar period, and the rise of some very important people to power in some very important countries. But I appreciate you hanging out if you made it this long. This was a fun video to do. I know, again, it was very, very topical, but it gets the job done, and we'll go back and we'll hit those other more intricate points later. Thanks for coming out. I appreciate you. Please do like, subscribe. Like I've been saying, I do want to grow this channel. It'd be really, really cool if this was my full-time gig. I'd love to push towards that. Any suggestions, let me know in the comments. Anything you want to talk about, hit me up down there. I'm always here for it. Appreciate you coming out, and I'll catch you in the next one.